Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out to me. Two ways to do this is, of course, through email, and then again through comments on YouTube. Now, I can't stress enough, comments are greatly appreciated because it helps me understand what you all think, and then I need that feedback. So, reach out to me. And also spread the word about my show, The Harboring Light. You know somebody that would be interested, and let them know. Alright, so on to the topic of choice. So what I'm going to do here is start out by talking about my thoughts on the aspects of punk rock, alright? The aspects of this, and get into the depths of that, okay? And then I'm going to end and talk about the aspects of Iggy Pop and his contributions to it. And then, as I mentioned on Monday, following weeks, I'm going to split it up where I talk about his book. Alright, with that said, let's get on to the business of punk rock and the music and everything else with that. Alright, here we go. Okay, first I'm going to give my personal opinions, and then I'm going to lead with facts and so forth. So this is how it's going to be broken up, all right? So, here's my thoughts. All right, I find it quite interesting with the origins of how this started. So, initially, I'm going off of the aspects of American versus British versus all these things, right? And then I'm going to get into the specifics of exactly what punk rock and the roots of it. So it's very different. Now, originally, I thought it was interesting when we get to UK perspective about punk rock, because they were, especially when you get into the London scene, when you get into bands like, oh my gosh, I don't know why it's failing me, but with Sid Vicious and all that, I don't know why it's failing me, because they were very well pronounced and everything in the punk rock movement. Hold on. Sometimes things like that happen. Hold on. Okay, so yeah, Sex Pistols, okay? Alright, so the Sex Pistols were very much intertwined into, the perspective about it. So they were unkempt. They were, really perpetuating the aspects of mosh pits. When mosh pits, people thrashing out, being uncontrollable with movements and dancing, and the aspects of form and formality of being associated, being into the movement of the artist and the sound. So that's sort of a acclamation of honor to see people moshing and doing all these things, right? And so it was particularly rooted in a certain means of going against authority and then going against class systems, right? Because at the time, if I'm not mistaken, Margaret Thatcher, now I mentioned this, a little bit, but I'll go into depth about it. So, because Margaret Thatcher, by no means was somebody that she wasn't well received. And, at that time, it was, especially around youth, the youth culture, it was more and more prevalent, people speaking out against the parliament and the way in which things were, right? And to where, they were especially expressing those means through music, because any other light, they didn't really have a means to do that as specifically as they could with music, because in the aspects of that, they could, you know, get away with, you know, saying whatever they wanted to say and express themselves the way they wanted to, because, you know, it's music. And so some say that the Sex Pistols were in itself, you know, designed in order to innate that kind of angst. And some say, well, you know, the Sex Pistols were really merging, you know, a really good example of looking into how the mechanics of music and subcultures and different varieties of blending sound and culture together. So what do I mean by that? Now, the aspects of blues and country and stuff, how does that relate to punk rock? Now, even though these categories are very different, they share the similarity in the aspects of their storytelling and the storytelling about hardship, right? And so, you know, really good, if you are a really good musician, from my point of view, you understand how to delve deep into that, and that transcends and that translates into what you're saying, what you're conveying. And those worlds kind of mix together. Now, punk rock was specifically supposed to be this aspects of going against authority and really being an anarchist, and being, you know, unabashed about it, like, you know, just being out front about it, you know. And it's quite interesting. People have their perspective that the Sex Pistols weren't really true to that sort of mentality. And here's the reason why. Some people say that they were just really focusing in on the negative aspects of, you know, what you would contribute to, or what people associate when it comes to punk rock. You know, with the mohawks, of course, that goes without saying, with the look and with the very bent, brute disposition towards life, bleak disposition towards life, lashing out, you know, all of these things. Some people will say that the true punk rockers here, you know, when it comes to this category, is a Clash, and then, you know, other bands, you know. So I'm going to give my point of view about that too. So I would say, yeah, I would agree with that, but they both have their bearings, right? Now, I would say I'm more inclined to appreciate the Clash, and I can understand the aspects and the attraction, especially when you're kind of in transition and you don't have a whole lot to say, and you're very, depending on your disposition and everything, being young, you know, Sex Pistols is a means to, you know, express that, just like the aspects of what a lot of people don't understand and what can be very problematic with the aspects of rap and things like that. So, you know, specifically certain types of rap. Now, not all rap is the same, and not all rap is bad. You know, when you get in the categories of the aspects of rap that has to do with mathematical rap or nerd rap, or, you know, stuff that has to do with everyday life, that's really concreted in reality, that's balanced, that has a very valuable message to contribute to society. It's vastly different than, unfortunately, the gangster rap kind of stuff that was pushed more and more out in the 90s, and then just, that's more of a mainstream. And so, when you're this young person that's going through a lot of issues, prone to, you're drawn to stuff like that. Okay. Now I would say the Clash, in retrospect, when you look back on it, yeah, because it's very sophisticated in which it's set up, and the things that they're talking about, because they are in themselves truly speaking and making a lot of commentary on the way in which things lay out in our in society, particularly from what they see, and those things can be very relatable if it's said well and presented well to a lot of different people, to where it's like, oh man, case in point, Lost in the Supermarket. All right, so this is one of many songs that I particularly enjoy. Okay, so when you listen to this song, you look back, and when you hear it and you actively listen to what is being said about it, it's something else. It's taking you on a journey, and it's remarkable. It's storytelling at its finest, because it's simple, but it's very complex at the same time. Now it's they're talking about the aspects of when they're going into the supermarket, right? They're seeing all these things that is laid out, and all these choices to choose from, right? But then they're recalling in the back of their mind, everything else that they have to deal with, in their interpersonal relationships, and how the supermarket is very intertwined in the decision making to make sure that the choices that they make and choose and pick in the supermarket helps with what's going on in their interpersonal relationship and their own selves too. Because very rarely, even when you're single, you still somehow, there still are consequences that affect someone else in some sort of fashion, right? Whether you inadvertently know that, or where you actively know that, or inadvertently you don't. It's just, that's just the way it is. If you want to live within society, if you want to be, a productive part of society, and they're saying very subtly, getting lost in the supermarket, right? Getting lost in the aspects of what choices, and you have these bountiful choices, but they can overwhelm you because of decision making of where to go next and how to do that, and that can be taken a lot of different ways. Some people might take the political, social, as anti-social aspects of saying, oh, consumerism is this, right? And attacking the aspects, oh, they're also overwhelmed because of consumerism, when the aspects of free market is very good. And these things lay themselves out and transcend and show the success of that. That's why America is such a success story, because it's implemented how good that can root people out of poverty and everything else when they have a free market to you choose at will what you want to do, where you want to go. And that's the beauty with free will in this life. And that's the beauty with also when you look deeper within that with spirituality, to be have that disposition in life. Free will is very important, because if you don't have it, a lot of chaos happens, because you don't have a sense of oneself. You can, you're not capable of being resilient and personally you're just not a self-disciplined person that's not encouraged, and everything else, that the problems that come along with not having free will. Okay, and all these things are interlaced in it when you hear what they're actually saying, right? And that is, I think, the true message when it comes to punk rock. It's all about the aspects of feeling this uncontrollable sort of disillusion sometimes, and pinpointing it out. Why is it that this happens a lot when you are going about in life, or where have you, or wherever you are in your life, or whatever part of the world you live in? Why is it that people think it's okay to mess with free will? So with that said, I'm going to move on and get into more facts about the aspects of punk rock, and then and talk about the contributions that Iggy Pop and all of that has given to the said genre. With all that said, let's go on here. Alright, so on to the aspects of punk rock. So punk rock is quite interesting because it was out of being fed up with the aspects of how rock was going in the 1970s, and I can understand that. So specifically, when we get into, some people label the rock, the scene that was going on with Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Leonard Skinner, the list goes on. Most of those bands as arena rock, and so arena rock is where they have concert people, masses of people coming to see them, and the scenario set up for that is that bloated, just really interested in where the bottom line is, comes with the money, sort of not really interested anymore too much with the sound and the expression, right? And so the hippie counterculture only went so far. That doesn't appeal to everybody. Everybody doesn't buy in, and everybody didn't buy into this aspects of this BS where love is love, free love kind of stuff, right? And I'm trying to censor myself here. Well, I don't like to cuss, but you know what I mean. So anyway, so that's that, and they got in the transition of it. So particularly, it's known that, and I'll link the source to you where I found all this information. It's known that as far as the American sound of punk really established itself in the bar CBGB's, which is a blues, was a blues bar. I don't think it's still in existence anymore. A blues bar, right? And so it wasn't intentionally supposed to, go into that left field, but when we get into the Ramones, we get into Blondie, bands like that, they say people coined them as the forerunner for bringing that punk scene, making it Americanized, right? And I would agree with that, because especially when we get into the specifics of the Ramones and Blondie. The Ramones, they were changing the aesthetics of what you would hear with the beach nostalgia 60s beat and surf music, and they made it garage band aesthetic, where it was laid out for you to hear the way the riffs go with the beats, and the rawness and the energy behind the lyrics and the message, right? And so Blondie, the same way, with her, how she exuded, especially with Debbie Harry, how she exuded sensuality with the aspects of rock and blues, and they had a sort of these things with establishing, when the 1980s came into these whole things as new wave, right? Where, they don't quite know how to label it, but it's just a new song being pushed out. So, yeah, Blondie was crossing those aspects of what the sound of rock and the aspects and aesthetics of female singers, or what they could do with rock, instead of something like what was going on with Fleetwood Mac and Heart, and let's see others. Linda Ronstadt, she was more pop. She was kind of in between there with the aspects of, different categories, country. She was doing a whole bunch of stuff. But anyway, yeah, Debbie Harry was definitely, cutting, so to speak, the range in which females were represented in the aspects of rock and lyrical sound. And then also to note the way in which they looked and presented themselves at a culture within it, cultivated. And then, that goes without saying that's something that's not particularly separated from each other, when it comes to things like that. You are what you eat, you are what you wear is a walking billboard for your personality. And definitely with the Ramones, they were having that, mixing that boy next door kind of vibe, but that boy next door that likes to tear everything up, versus Blondie, where she's got that sort of femme fatale look, but it's sort of laced with subversion. And then as she went along in her career, she got with the couture look and more high fashion. But, for the most part, it was very, pieced together. And that's the whole aesthetic a lot too, with the image of punk, and bringing different materials together. And then some say it's out of the necessity of not having a whole lot to begin with, like a whole lot of money, and then piecing together, making something look collectively unison. But it just like it's if you're clipping, for instance, a poster for a punk rock band or something, particularly at the time, and now sort of, when you look at the details and the layers of it, most of them look like for the most part, it looks like somebody's clipping something out of a magazine and just placing it together, and there you go. And so that's pretty much the mentality of the aspects of that too, finding materials that work with what you want to express about the band or say about the band, and represent about the band, and piecemeal them together, and here you go, and attract the audience. Now, as across the pond, as they say, the UK, particularly with England, again, when I was saying about the aspects of Margaret Thatcher and the socioeconomic class, people, a lot, and being fed up with all that and aligning themselves, especially in particular with the youth and culture, rebelling against that. And then, as I mentioned, with the Sex Pistols being in the forerunner of that. So there's that. Alright, so let's get into the Stooges. Alright, so and this is how we get with Iggy Pop. Now, what are my prongs about? What my thoughts about Iggy Pop? I thought Iggy Pop, and I think Iggy Pop is a particularly interesting artist because he was the one. He's an artist that understands the aspects of. It's good to, meld and evolve your sound. He didn't stay stagnant in aspects of where he originated. He evolved with the times. Really good example of this is which is interesting to note because it's used in, I think it's mixtape, whatever the hell that game is, where you don't really quite eat. It's just, which is quite interesting too, with the story in which I understand where you, and I mentioned it before on here on my show, where you this video game where it's not really a video game, it's more like a movie. Which the creators have said that they wanted it to be a movie, but it didn't. They didn't quite fit the category, or they don't have the professional know-how to actually execute it. Which says a whole lot with the state in which entertainment and the movie industry and everything else is. That wow, if they are like, well, maybe you should try again. That's really saying a lot. But anyhow. And they decided somebody is somebody in the production team, their dad is very important in the video world or something like that, right? The monkey, he's a high end. And so this mixtape video game, it's weird because you don't really have to achieve any goals. You just get where you from point A to point B, and there's just no real effort put in it. But my whole point of bringing it up is that the song "Candy" is by Iggy Pop, is referenced in it, and they say that people, some people, what's his name? Thank the guy, YouTube creator. I think before you sleep, he says that most of the songs on there, you have to be much older to be, understand the references, which I can agree with that, but it's one of those things. It's very important to know your audience because they're supposed to be attracting, a younger crowd, but they're being very pretentious in the way in which they're talking. The main character is very, annoying in a way in which she's representing the know-how about this particular music. But anyway, I'll say yeah, but it's one of those things where too it has to do with what your parents introduce you to, and then your own self. So I take that with a grain of salt. But anyway, I think that the particular song "Candy" is a good representation of where in which Iggy Pop sees and aligns with the place of music. Alright, so one of the female leads from B-52s, the B-52s was singing it. They were a duo for this song, and pretty much it went back into, the crooner kind of, sort of disposition of swooning sort of songs, and then I guess you can lamenting over of a relationship that's not really working out too well. There's a lot of things that are underlined and a lot of different interpretations that can be thought about and seen and understood about the song. Alright, so, and particularly it's quite interesting because when it was released, I believe it came out in the 80s or so, it's very big and pronounced for, especially in the pop world, were known for male attracted, they're attractive for one, but male leads and male singers and female singers to have duets with one another and just have this heartfelt, duets. Right, duets were very, very popular in the 80s, but the way in which the two of them, Iggy Pop and her from B-52s, let me look her name up right quick before I just keep saying from B-52s. Hold on. Alright. I'm sorry. Let me say right quick. Alright. B-52s. Alright, so members here. Kate Pearson. Alright, so Kate Pearson. Okay. She was singing with him. Alright, and then it was very artistic in expression in which they were talking about and giving the explanations in which things happened and evolved in their interpersonal relationships and the aspects of love in relationships. Now that's a far cry from where Iggy Pop originally began, because he was a forerunner for the Stooges, right? And they were all about, hey, da 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 da, and hey man, the establishment and everything else. And he set the ground for that, because he was this guy out there pretty much saying, hey, towing the line where everything with the problems in the foyers with the state in which the government and everything else was going in the 70s and so forth. But he was more, you could say maybe it was more like for forerunner for metal too, in which he would establish himself, because it's something to see how he would just move around on the stage. It was just, he would thrash around on the stage and be very just as if he was having a nuclear, like a nuclear explosion, just very combustible, and to get the message a point of like going against the establishment, right? And so that's another element to pick up on, how somebody like him set up the possibilities in which punk rock can be thought about. Alright, so with that said, those are my thoughts about it in this installment about music and culture particularly focusing in on punk rock and not all of everything else. If you want to keep this conversation going, feel free to reach out. Best way to do that is through email. You get more of an immediate response. And of course, I always greatly appreciate YouTube comments. And don't be shy. Feel free to reach out to me, because it only helps my channel grow. It only helps my radio show grow by knowing what y'all think. Alright, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care out there. Bye bye for now.